If you're a mid-level to C-suite leader who wants to own your growth and figure out your next small, brave move to achieve your leadership goals, you are in the right place. Welcome to the Small Brave Moves podcast, a weekly deep dive on how to be braver in leadership and in life for exceptional results. I'm your host, Nicole Bianchi, best-selling author, certified master executive coach, NSA certified speaking professional, chief bravery officer, and tough talk expert. If you're ready to become a better, braver, and more authentic leader, let's dive in. Hello, friends and brave leaders. Welcome back to the Small Brave Moves podcast, where we explore the tiny acts of courage that create extraordinary leadership. And today we're going to talk about something that shows up in leadership far more often than most people realize. Resistance. Not resistance from your team, not resistance from your organization, but the resistance that quietly shows up inside of us as leaders when things get really uncomfortable. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Most leadership problems aren't actually strategy problems. They're self-leadership problems, and they're the moments when pressure rises, and instead of responding with courage, we react from fear. This idea is something I've been exploring deeply while writing my third book, Conquer Yourself, Not Others, which will be coming out in late 2026. One of the most powerful ideas from that work is something I call the cycle of resistance. I want you to think about it like leadership isn't about navigating external challenges. It's about recognizing what happens internally when things get really hard. Research from Harvard Business School and the Center for Creative Leadership shows that one of the biggest derailers of leadership effectiveness isn't the lack of intelligence or your technical skills. It's how leaders behave under pressure. When stress rises, leaders often default to behaviors like over-controlling, shutting down input, avoiding difficult conversations, doubling down on decisions that clearly aren't working. And it's not because they're bad leaders, but because something inside of them has been triggered. And once that internal reaction starts, the cycle of resistance begins. Another study from Deloitte found that more than 70% of workplace transformation initiatives fail. Now, that's not a new stat. And it's not because the strategy was wrong, but because leaders struggled to adapt their behavior when uncertainty and resistance showed up. In other words, again, the strategy didn't fail, the leadership response did. And leadership today comes with constant pressure. Technology is evolving faster than ever. Teams are more distributed. Expectations are higher, and leaders are being asked to make decisions when the answers just aren't always clear. And all of that creates the perfect environment for internal resistance to show up inside of ourselves. So think about a recent moment where something didn't go the way you expected. Maybe a team member challenged your decision in a meeting. Maybe a client pushed back on something you felt confident about. Or maybe a project that you worked hard on didn't land the way you hoped. Or maybe something important started unraveling at the last minute. In moments like that, something happens almost instantly, and it's a reaction. It's a tightening. It's a sense of threat. So before we even realize it, we're no longer responding from curiosity or courage. We're responding from resistance. And resistance can show up in a lot of different ways. Overthinking, micromanaging, avoiding a conversation that you know you need to have, dismissing someone's idea too quickly before listening, delaying a decision because the discomfort feels just too heavy. Carol Dweck's research on mindset shows that when people feel their competence or identity is being threatened, they often default to protective behaviors instead of learning behaviors. And in leadership, that protection often looks like resistance. So here's the tricky part though. Most high capacity leaders have been trained to outthink the discomfort instead of recognizing it. We analyze, we strategize, we push harder. And the real work of leadership isn't always about thinking harder. Sometimes it's about noticing the internal pattern that's already unfolding for us. So let me give you a real example of how this shows up. Not long ago, I was working with a senior leader who had a high performing team. So smart people, strong results, great reputation, and something started shifting. And one of her team members began pushing back on her decisions in meetings. Now, not aggressively, but consistently. And every time it happened, she felt something tighten inside. And I can relate to this. I've been in this situation before. And her first instinct was control. Her thoughts sounded like this. Well, one, why are they questioning me, right? Don't they trust my judgment? I need to maybe shut this down. So she started doing what many leaders do when resistance kicks in. She talked more in meetings, explained her reasoning in greater detail, made decisions faster so there was less room for debate. And from the outside, it looked like confidence, but internally, it was resistance. And when we unpacked the situation together, I asked her a simple question. I said, what if their pushback isn't a challenge to your authority, but a signal that your team feels safe enough to think critically with you? Well, that stopped her. And because that moment, she saw it differently and everything began to change for her. Instead of shutting down the conversation in the next meeting, she tried something different. She said, tell me more about what you're seeing that I might be missing. And suddenly the dynamic shifted and that conversation got better. The ideas got stronger, and the team member who had been pushing back became one of her most valuable thought partners. Nothing about the team changed. The strategy didn't change. The leader changed how she responded to the resistance, and that changed everything. Because resistance rarely shows up as one dramatic moment. It tends to move through a pattern where something triggers discomfort, fear enters the picture, we push against the situation instead of working through it, and we react in ways that just don't serve us or the people around us. Later, we looked back and think, I wish I had handled that differently. And this pattern can unfold in seconds, or it can play out over months. So, leaders get stuck in it when they avoid a conversation or when they cling to control instead of empowering their team. When they stay in a role maybe that no longer fits, or when they spend so much energy trying to control external circumstances that they stop paying attention to what's happening internally. Daniel Goleman's research on emotional intelligence shows that leaders with higher self-awareness significantly outperform their peers in areas like engagement, trust, adaptability. And why is that? Because they catch the internal reaction before it shapes their behavior. They interrupt the cycle early. The best leaders don't avoid resistance. They just recognize it sooner. They notice when fear is driving their decisions, and they see when the control creeps into their leadership. And they get curious about their reactions instead of judging themselves. And then they take small, brave moves forward. And maybe that move is just asking for help. Maybe it's letting go of something that just isn't working. Maybe it's having the conversation that they have been avoiding. But the key is this: they interrupt the pattern before it spirals. And when leaders start doing this, the impact shows up quickly. And at the individual level, leaders will develop greater self-awareness and emotional agility. Instead of reacting automatically, they pause. They pause long enough to choose their response. And that means fewer fear-driven decisions, less defensiveness, less micromanagement, and far more clarity when navigating uncertainty. Many leaders describe it as feeling more grounded, more confident, less reactive, and they stop fighting every moment and begin leading with what I call flow and ease. Not because leadership becomes easy, but because they stop battling themselves while they lead. And at the team level, something powerful happens. When leaders interrupt their own resistance patterns, the emotional climate of the team changes. People speak up sooner, feedback becomes normal, and brave conversations happen so much earlier. Trust grows, and teams move faster because they're not wasting all that energy and avoiding tension. At the organizational level, culture shifts. Decision-making accelerates, innovation increases, hidden resistance during change initiatives decrease, and leaders just stop spending so much of their energy protecting their ego or their position. Instead, they focus on impact, alignment, progress. The organizations that thrive aren't the ones who avoid resistance. They're the ones that learn to recognize it early, and then they move through it together. This idea sits at the heart of my upcoming book, Conquer Yourself, Not Others. Leadership, it's not about controlling outcomes, and it's not about forcing alignment. And certainly it's not about winning every disagreement. Great leadership starts with the willingness to lead yourself first. When leaders learn to recognize and interrupt their own resistance patterns, something powerful happens. They become more adaptable, more courageous, and more open to feedback, and far more capable of creating environments where teams can thrive. So before I close today, I want to leave you with one question. Where is resistance showing up in your leadership right now? Where are you pushing against something instead of getting curious about it? Because every leader encounters resistance, but the ones who make the greatest impact aren't the ones who avoid it. They're the ones who recognize it, interrupt it, and move forward with courage anyway. And often that next step forward begins with one small, brave move. So thank you so much for joining me today. Until the next time, keep making those small, brave moves towards bigger leadership, braver leadership, stronger teams, the courage to conquer yourself, not others. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Small Brave Moves podcast. If you're wanting to take this work even deeper, I'm here to help. From engaging in inspirational keynote speeches to transformational coaching and workshops for leaders and teams, page-turning books, online courses, and enlightening leadership development retreats. There are so many ways that we can work together to take your leadership to the next level. For more information, check out the show notes, and let's do this together, one small brave move at a time. See you next week.